we will start the module 3 of the NOC course Symbolic Logic. The module 3 will introduce you how to recognize arguments, whether there are any guidelines for identifying a set of claims as arguments. Then we will also look into how to do the diagramming of the logic flow given in the argument. Each of these are important skills, so we will try to get it clearer as we go into the through the lecture. So, first thing is, how does one recognize an argument? Are there any tips to be given for recognition of an argument, and so on? Well, the first thing is that remember the definition of an argument. In our previous module, I have already explained that arguments are special set of claims. So, if you do not know what claims are, then set of claims you will not be able to identify. So, better that you clarify what is it that you know about the claims. Second, any set of claims cannot be an argument, that also we have established. There has to be a certain internal structure, and that structure would be the conclusion is going to be supported by the remaining claims which will act as premises. So, that definition is going to be your basic guideline for understanding or for identifying an argument, but then there are also some tangible signs. Sometimes these tangible signs or cues may come from language itself. So, remember to read the argument carefully. Sometimes the linguistic cues may help. Linguistic cues as in some words, some phrases that might be there in the passage or in the set of claims itself. What kind of language words? Well, there are known some indicator words. For example, there are some premise indicator words. These words typically usually indicate that what follows is a premise. When you say since this is the case, therefore that has to be the case, that since is a premise indicator since. Or for, you are giving a reason. So, you say for this has to be the case, because that is a giveaway clear indicator premise indicator word, given that there are many such words. So, just to give you an idea, that read the passage carefully and try to identify or locate premise indicator words, so that you know what follows must be acting as, these are claims which are acting as premises. Similarly, there are also conclusion indicator words. So, words which indicate that what follows has to be a conclusion. For example, a clear indicator word is therefore. What follows the therefore has to be the conclusion. Hence, it follows that, thus, so, etc. So, these are not exhaustive list, but this is just to open your eyes that it is important to read the argument carefully or the passage carefully to see whether there is an argument in it or not. So, I said that first of all the definition itself is going to matter. Then I said there also might be linguistic cues, and the language has to be carefully read and reread in order to identify this. When I say this, I also say this with responsibility that sometimes none of these words may be there, and we will take some example of that also. But right now, let us see when we say that if there are linguistic clues, how they can help. So, first example comes to you like this. Here is a small passage, and what we are asking ourselves, does it contain an argument? Is this an argument or not? Let us read it first. There is nothing that we can do now, for we have exhausted our options, and in the process we have created unnecessary hostility. You are asking yourself, is it a set of claims? First question. And the answer is yes. There are number of claims. For example, here, for example, here, for example, here. Then next the question is there a certain kind of relationships? Is there a main claim and supporting claim sort of relationship? You can also ask instead of that, are there any indicator words here? We have found one which says for. So, this is the case for that. What does that tell you? That what follows the for is being offered as a supporting reason why this has to be the case. So, here the for is acting up as the premise indicator word, and that should tell you that this is an argument. And then if you do the close reading, you will find that indeed what follows the for are two reasons what is being given as the reason why the person is saying there is nothing we can do now. That is a rather argument in despair, but still the structure, the necessary structure remains. So, have you understood this? This is the premise indicator word that sometimes helps us to identify an argument. Let us take another example. This is what we are looking at. The project work has to be finished by summer. Therefore, I cannot ever leave until the summer is over. Is this an argument? First question, is it a set of claims with a certain specific relationship among the claims inside? The answer is yes on both counts. Moreover, there is this conclusion indicator word which is therefore. So, what follows the therefore is being proposed as the conclusion of this argument. What is the conclusion? I cannot ever leave until the summer is over. Question is why? That answer is given here because the project work has to be finished by summer. So, in a way you can see what I was talking about, that you can get help if you read the argument rather closely and look for this kind of linguistic clues that are often left inside the passages. Having said that, I will further add that I also said that there are these kind of linguistic clues given in the passage by the original user of the argument, but sometimes there is nothing. But trust your logic sense and you will find that there you can still identify the logical relationship that should be or supposed to be there in the set in order for it to qualify as an argument. Let me show you an example. See, we should not become too dependent on the language cues, that is the whole point. So, let me show you this particular example, as we say that sometimes there may not be any linguistic cues, because people write in a different sort of ways, people speak in different sort of ways, and sometimes we just it is understood. So, here is a sample of what I am saying. Here is a passage, and the passage looks a little long, so I will read out with you. Desert mountain tops make good sites for astronomy. Being high, they sit above a portion of the atmosphere, enabling a star's light to reach a telescope without having to swim through the entire depth of atmosphere. Being dry, the desert is also relatively cloud free. The merest veil of cloud can render a sky useless for many astronomical measures. Again, the question is this an argument, or is it just a passage, or is it just a set of claims? Let us read through. First of all, please note that there are no telltale linguistic clues here. So, there is no premise indicator word, there is no conclusion indicator word, but without these, can we survive? Can we just find out whether this is an argument or not? Let us try to find that out. Let us read the argument once more and rather closely. Is it a set of claim which has a main claim? Is it trying to push one point as its principal or main point? The answer is, if you read it again, is yes. The whole passage is trying to establish that desert mountaintops make good sites for astronomy. So, where if you are thinking about where to put an astronomy lab, the answer is better sites are desert mountaintops. And the remaining whatever you get to see here are reasons being given why this has to be the case. For example, here being high. So, there is an altitude thing. Remember, it is a mountaintop, it is not a flat desert. It is the top of the mountain where you are putting it. So, being high, there is a certain advantage, and that is what is being talked about in this part. Then there is further point being made that it is also dry, and that has certain advantages for astronomical observations. So, these are the two reasons why desert mountaintops make good sites for astronomy. What does it show us? That what we have here is a main claim or a conclusion, and the remaining claims are acting as evidentiary basis or supporting base for adducing or putting forth that main claim, which is why they are premises. And that alone, that relationship alone is sufficient to establish why this has to be an argument totally. We did not get to see any linguistic clues here. So, we did not get to see, for example, any premise indicator word or a conclusion indicator word, which is what I was talking about. But as I said, learn to read carefully and learn to trust your innate logic sense, and you will find that relationship. Remember, that relationship is the very basic condition that has to be filled out before you can call a set of claims an argument. Okay? So, there are both ways are acceptable. If you are lucky, you will have the linguistic clues. If not, even then you can survive by trusting and by reading closely. So, here if we can lay it out like this, that we are not using the standard format, but still we can separate out the components of this argument. The conclusion is desert mountaintops make good sites for astronomy. The rest are premises providing the support for this main claim. Okay. So, this is how we can actually try to recognize an argument. It will take practice, and I suggest that you try to read newspapers, that you try to read some small passages or look at different texts to see whether you can apply this skill there. Remember the definition of a claim, remember the definition of an argument, and remember that there are this kind of linguistic clues also, and that should help you to recognize an argument. Next is, for this module, as I said, that we will learn how to capture the logic flow in the argument. Remember that in the argument there is always a logical relationship among the components. There is a certain kind of a structure. So, to visually represent that, we can do certain kind of flow chart or some kind of diagram, and that is what we are trying to learn here. But why is diagramming needed? Well, diagramming is needed first of all to understand the logic given in the argument. Remember, we will finally talk about whether this is the correct reasoning or incorrect reasoning, but first we have to understand the logic given in the argument. So, diagramming sort of helps to reveal the logic that has been put forth in the argument. Also, it is a basic analytical tool. So, if you are trying to understand somebody else's argument, in a way it helps if you can lay it out like this, and then sort of look into how does the logic flow, and then you can make comments on whether this was sufficient or insufficient, or this is credible, or this is providing this right kind of supporting base or not. So, I have made this point that there is a reason why we are looking into the diagramming of the logic flow. It's a skill that can be practiced also. So, overall the logic flow diagram is a visual representation of the logic inside an argument. We are going inside the argument and trying to capture the logic flow. What do we have to do? Well, first of all, now you know what claims are or what statements are. So, pick out each statement in the argument, each one, regardless of whether it is premise or conclusion, in the order they come, in the sequence in which the statements are made, pick out each statement in the argument. And then you do what? You put a number against them or some sort of a reference system. So, you might put 1, 2, 3, or you can also use other referencing A, B, C, but some way we are not going to use the entire whole statements, but we will refer to them by these numbers or by these symbols. And then we will try to capture the flow with certain directions. Directions means where does the support coming and what is it supposed to support. Remember, the whole argument is supposed about a main claim and then the remaining claims are trying to provide support. So, the flow is, the logic flow is the direction from the premises to the conclusion. Okay. So, that we are going to capture with arrow diagram. We will show you in a second, but we are going to use arrow signs to show how the logic is flowing from premises to conclusion. We will take an example and then maybe the whole structuring will become clearer. Say here is a small example. Because every object's temperature is above absolute 0, motion at the atomic level is always present. Is this an argument? The answer is yes. You have the premise indicator word also, plus you can see that this is supposed to provide the support to this claim, that is your conclusion. So, it is clear now what we have to do, that we need to pick up the component claims from this passage. So, we will number them like so. For example, this statement we are going to number it as 1. There are only 2 claims and then here is your second one and we number it as 2. So, we are not going to refer to the whole statement anymore, we will simply use 1 and 2 in our diagram. And let me ask you, then we know how the logic is flowing, where which one is your premise, which one is your conclusion, you have already identified by now. So, that is what we will try to capture. Because of 1, 2 is being put forth as the statement that has to be true. So, here is your simple diagram, a simple linear arrow that shows this is the premise and from this the logic is flowing towards, or the support is flowing towards this conclusion. All right. This is what we call capturing the logic flow inside an argument. Now, this is very, very simple. I understand this is one premise, one conclusion situation, and that too not a very complicated one. But you can imagine that there can be many complexities involved in this. Let me show you some of the structures that are available. See, it's not, I told you that there are many kinds of relationships possible. The way the premise supports the conclusion can also be different. Let me show you. Through structures, these relationships will become very clear. Many kinds of structures possible because of the way in which premises support the conclusion. Here is a small sample, for example. See, we have identified the components. Obviously, 3 is the conclusion in some argument, and these are the premises. But look in which way they are supporting 3. 1 is supporting 3, 2 is also supporting 3. Note that they are supporting 3 independently. That is, from 1 also 3 follows, from 2 also 3 follows. And they are converging, they are independently supporting, but their support is converging in 3. And look the way it is represented here. So, when this situation, this kind of structure happens, you know that there is no connection, not necessarily present between 1 and 2. Nonetheless, each of them is acting as a premise towards 3. So, this is one kind of a structure. Now, compare that, we will show you actual examples in a second. Compare that with this structure, the second one. Here also we have 3 components, but look at the way the premises are supporting the conclusion. So, 1 and 2, they are the premises and they are jointly supporting 3. How to indicate that? Well, that is why we have connected them like so. This is a structure that shows that 1 alone is not supporting 3, 2 alone is not supporting 3, but they are jointly supporting 3. So, in a way the diagram captures more than what you can simply say by saying that 1 is a premise, 2 is a premise. The nature of that support will be captured also in your structure, in your flow diagram. So, let me show you the actual examples that we were talking about. Here is one. This is a passage. So, let us take a look. Contrary to what many people may think, a positive test for HIV is not necessarily a death sentence. That is a claim. For one thing, the time from the development of antibodies to clinical symptoms averages nearly 10 years. That is claim 2. For another, many reports are now suggesting that a significant number of people who test positive may never develop clinical AIDS. That is claim number 3. So, there are 3 claims, and what we have done is to number them like so. The question is, what is the relationship among them? Now, by now you know enough to say that the first sentence has to be the conclusion. What we are claiming is that a positive, if you are HIV positive, that does not necessarily mean that you are going to die. It is not necessarily a death sentence. That is the conclusion. Why? And then we have these 2 premises coming up. For one thing, that is a linguistic clue, a premise indicator. For another, that is a linguistic clue also for your premise indicator. So far so good, but how do I represent this in our flow diagram? The question is, how do you see the premise, say this one, the what we are calling number 2, how is it supporting the conclusion? And then the premise, this what we are calling 3, how is it supporting the conclusion? For one thing this, for another thing this. That should tell you that they are supporting it independently. From this also this follows, from this also this follows. So, the structure that is going to capture the relationship is going to look like so. From 2, 1, from 3, 1. Remember, we said that if it is independently supporting, then we do not have to connect them. This in itself is sufficient, this in itself sufficient, but somebody is using both of these reasons to support this in this argument. So, that is our diagram of this argument. Let us take another example. So, independent support, and we do not join it together. But when we find that the premises jointly are supporting, or that there is some internal connection between the premises, then we need to show the link between the premises, and that is another example that we will try to look into. This is something that we have encountered earlier. So, this passage rather longish, but we have seen this earlier. So, desert mountain tops make good sites for astronomy. Being high, they sit above a portion of the atmosphere, enabling a star's light to reach a telescope without having to swim through the entire depth of atmosphere. This whole thing is your claim number 2. Being dry, the desert is also relatively cloud free. 3. The merest veil of cloud can render a sky useless for many astronomical measures. That is your 4. So, there are 4 total components in this passage, and we have already in earlier module we have talked about this has to be the conclusion. The remainings are all premises giving support to this. So, the question is now, how are they supporting the conclusion, and the way to represent this would be something like this. that one, that this being high, that in itself is a reason why desert mountain tops make good sites for astronomy. So, here is this link. Then there is this 3 and 4. 3 says being dry, it's also, the desert is also relatively cloud free. And then comes a somewhat sort of an explanation of this dryness. Why this cloud freeness is required is because the merest veil of cloud can render a sky useless for astronomical purposes. So, in a way they become a joint sort of linked premises, and then they support one also. What did we just notice? That here is a reason why one has to be the case, here is another reason why it has to be the case. These two are independent reasons, but within this independent reason there is a linked sort of a support among the claims of this group. So, this little nuances within the argument you can capture by this kind of a logic diagram. Let me conclude this model by showing you other possible structures. You know, sometimes that you can imagine the complexities that might be there in any argument. Here is an interesting one. For example, sometimes you might feel that there is a chain sort of an argument within the same argument, that first there is this point which leads to a sub conclusion, then it leads to the main conclusion. So, 3 is your main conclusion and 2 has a dual role to play. So, it is both a premise as well as a conclusion, and in a way what you have is a linked argument going. So, that is one kind of a structure. And here is, I mean, this is an arbitrary case of course, but you can see the complexity that you can capture like this. Here is 5 is the main conclusion, but it is coming through the support of 4. 4 is a important premise, and for 4 there are many support. 1 is supporting 4 independently, 2 and 3 are linked, and that is how they are supporting 4, but altogether all of them are supporting 5. So, this is just to show you that there can be the internal dynamics within the argument is sometimes very interesting, and what the logic flow diagram does is to capture that internal relationship. This is where I will end this module 3. Thank you.